Hello everyone, this is Supersnoopy here, back with the Nostalgia Republic video. Today I have for you guys a Nostalgia Republic mini guide video. In today's mini guide video, we're going to be going over the art of soloing group content. So in this game, a lot of people love to solo content that's typically meant for 4 players, or maybe even just like more than one. And this is going to be a very general tip video of how exactly you can solo this content and some of these strategies that I typically use when soloing stuff, just to survive and of course to succeed. So I hope you guys enjoy this Nostalgia Republic video. As always, if you guys enjoy these videos, then make sure to leave a like. And if you guys want some gaming mints, then check the link in the description down below, Catalyst Gaming Mints. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoy this video, and I'll see you guys in this guide. Alrighty guys, so let's get into this right now. So for the example in this video, I'm going to be using a very basic example. I'm going to be using the veteran Flashpoint, the Red Reaper. This is meant for 4 players. Obviously I'm in here alone. Most obvious thing, pretty straightforward, is have a companion with his current role set to heal. The one thing that's important with a heal companion is they can heal you when you're actually getting attacked, and you can survive stuff very easily. Pretty straightforward tip, obviously. Another thing to note is typically you want your companion to be a really high influence level, because the higher you have of influence on a companion, the more they can actually do when it comes down to damage, healing, and tanking. So obviously this companion I'm using right here in this gameplay footage is a influence rank 50 healer. As you can tell, I'm not taking almost any damage, and I mean, especially with this Flashpoint, since we are on the veteran mode, which is essentially story mode, we aren't dealing with too many issues. But obviously if we were to go into a higher difficulty or anything else, you know, having a high influence companion would definitely you know, help us out a lot and would reduce the amount of deaths that actually occur. So that is the first little tip right there. Pretty straightforward. Like I said, all you gotta really do is just have a high influence companion. Now the second tip that, at least in my opinion, is pretty important to realize is the act of kiting and you know, line of sight. Now the main reason this is important, because when you deal with enemies that are really high levels, like for example, you know, these enemies right here are just starting to rush me, I'm gonna try to run away from them even though they're trying to like pull me back, mainly because if you know, you stay away from them, they can't deal as much damage to you. But the most important thing to consider is when you're running away, try not to backpedal. I know that I'm like occasionally doing it right here, like for example this Marauder is attacking me. Typically just try to run forward, and you can also like essentially kind of like look back every now and then just to actually attack them. And if they are a trooper like this guy, then typically you want to get away from at least 30 meters from him. If you are a ranged, I say, a character, when you're attacking these guys, it typically helps a lot. But even if you are melee, if you need to get some extra heals, you don't want to die just yet, then typically it's smart to try and run away from the enemy, and then carry your healer along with you. And if they don't decide to go with you, then you can set them to passive, and then they will teleport you, and then you can take them off of passive, and you won't have many issues. So that is the second tip right there. Now the third tip is when you're dealing with trash mobs like these. Obviously with this Flashpoint isn't the best example because they aren't clearly attacking me right now, but one of the best examples, at least in my opinion, to do is if you have a ton of enemies you're dealing with in one room, typically you can like stun one of them with one of your abilities that stuns them for like 60 seconds. For example, like this guy. So if this guy were attacking me and I'm attacking all these other guys in the room, that is one less enemy I have to deal with damage wise. So typically that is pretty useful in itself, and that can definitely be very beneficial when you are actually soloing this content. Now another thing to be aware of, in my opinion, probably the most important thing you can do, especially in this guide, is you need to try to get the ability called Unity. Now Unity is an ability that allows you and your companion to take a 50% you know, less damage. Essentially it's a damage reduction buff. You can find it in your legacy. You can just go to the other tab, and as you can see with alignment, there will be the legacy of sacrifice and the legacy of unity. They're incredibly cheap, as you can, you know, probably see right here. You know, unlock requirements is level 50 and a dark 5 or light 5. You know, cartel coins, or you know, 250k and legacy level 10. So even if you're free to play, this is still a really valid option, and I would highly recommend actually obtaining this ability. So once again, with this ability, you can you can have a 50% damage reduction for 15 seconds, and it also includes your companion. So if your companion's dealing with a bunch of aggro in one area, then you can actually allow them to survive, I say, attacks much easier. Now another thing I can't stress enough is you need to time your defensives very carefully. This room, for example, and this, this flashpoint is a very good example of how to time your abilities. So you can see there's going to be 3 guys over there in the back that are going to start attacking me. Obviously, they're going to do a ton of damage. So I'm going to pop my reflect and just allow them to do a ton of damage. Just reflect everything with no big deal. Then I'm going to switch to my reactive shield. And as you can tell, I have 2 defensives now. And for whatever reason, if I wasn't able to survive this, I could easily activate my Unity, and I would be fine. This is something that's definitely important to note, is you really don't want to get greedy, and you don't want to activate too many defenses at the same time, because if you actually do that, then you can end up dying, and you also can sacrifice a lot of time. I mean, as you can tell, my companion's currently getting attacked, and that's another thing as well, is even though it's bad that your companion is getting attacked, typically if you have a lot of enemies in a room and you need to heal up, it is smart to just allow them to stay up, because if they stay up, then you know it's less damage on you, and it gives you a good opportunity to heal back up, get back into the fight, or also start attacking enemies when they aren't expecting you. And possibly one of the most important things is, obviously with this example we're doing a very straightforward, something very easy to solo. But if you're in a situation where you're dealing with like a hard boss, for example like this boss, say he's incredibly difficult and I'm struggling to actually take him out, then one thing I do need to keep in mind is sometimes you might need to sacrifice your companion. And what I mean by that is if your companion's taking a ton of damage and they really are becoming an issue, then what you can do is you can allow them to die. And if you actually do have one of these abilities, for example I have an emergency medical probe where you can res someone in combat, then it might be wise to save that and just wait to actually use it. One thing to note, obviously, is not all classes actually have these abilities, but if you do have this ability, I would highly recommend utilizing it. Just understand that you can res companions as well as players inside combat, and that is something that is really important to realize, because if you're in the middle of a fight and your companion actually dies and you might need him, then it is smart to actually do. Another thing is, obviously, I say with the defensives, especially with like Unity and the heroic mode I'm using right now, you typically want to use these near the start of fights, whether it's a boss fight or just trash mobs that can give you an issue in a certain fight. You definitely want to use these pretty often, because once the cooldown is up, you can use them again. It's not an ability that can only be used once per fight. So that's something to definitely keep in mind right there. Just understand that you do want to actually use them pretty often. Just try to use them as much as you possibly can, and obviously that will benefit you a ton, because if your companion does die, you can res them back up and you will have your abilities again. Then you can use those abilities and then you can just repeat the process. Now this isn't as big of a deal when you're dealing with the easier content to solo in the game, like this flashpoint, but one thing that is obviously important is you need a ton of gear. Obviously gear is going to help you out a ton in these fights, mainly because if you have a lot of gear, you will be able to survive. But not only gear, you definitely need to make sure you have a stim on you, and not only a stim, you also need to make sure that you do have, you also need to make sure that you do have some adrenals, attack adrenals, and a med pack. Obviously, you know, with the current state of the game, there are reusable ones, and that's what I'm currently using. But if you don't want to actually obtain those, then one thing that you should highly consider is obviously just carrying a few med packs. If you know that you're going to be dealing with content that is pretty hard to actually solo, then obviously you might want to just go ahead and carry a med pack, just so when you're in the middle of a fight you can just quickly get a heal up and survive, because that's typically something that can be very reliable just in the middle of something. And one more thing as an added bonus, obviously if you're if you're able to stealth through certain trash mobs, then I would highly recommend it. It can help with completing fights easier, and if you're struggling with a boss, you can just kind of skip all the hassle of the mobs that are found before it. But other than that, those are all of my extremely basic but pretty useful tips when it comes down to soloing group content. Obviously, those aren't any like crazy tips. They clearly aren't something that's gonna like insanely just allow you to solo any content. But it's definitely something that you should highly consider, and I would highly recommend just kind of keeping in the back of your head, especially when you are clearing content alone that might need some extra assistance. So I hope you guys enjoyed this SWTOR Republic video. As always, if you guys enjoy these videos, then make sure to leave a like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one.